Recording in progress.
We good? All right. Good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock. I'm now calling the Morgan Hill Unified School District Special Board of Education meeting to order. Discussion of upcoming board vacancy for July 9th, 2024. I'll begin by leading the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. Again, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to begin by reading just a brief message. We are meeting today because on July 2nd, 2024, Trustee Terry Eves Knudsen from Trustee Area 3 submitted a letter of resignation to the Santa Clara County Superintendent of Schools. Trustee Knudsen's term was scheduled to end 2026. The board must now consider how to fill the board vacancy created by Trustee Eves Knudsen's resignation when that resignation goes into effect in August. Our legal counsel will present to the board the specific requirements for filling this board vacancy and options available to the board under applicable law and board policy. Before we begin, we'll have introductions of board members and staff, and I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Adam Escoto, and I'm the board president, and we will go to from my right.
Good evening and welcome, Nancy Altman, Vice President.
Good evening, Terry Eves Knudsen, Trustee.
Hello, colleagues and members of the community, Mary Patterson, Trustee.
Hello, welcome, bienvenidos, Ivan Rosales Montes, Trustee.
Good evening, welcome, Pamela Gardner, Trustee.
Thank you for joining us. John Honer, Trustee.
Kelly Schriefer, Executive Assistant to the Superintendent.
Good evening, Carmen Garcia, Superintendent.
Thank you all. The next item is item C on our agenda, and it's adoption of the agenda. We'll move on to approve tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion?
I so make a motion.
Thank you, Trustee Gardner. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Trustee Montes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion carries. The next item is public comment. And so before we begin that, allow me to read this brief statement. Members of the public may address the board on any topics not listed on the agenda. However, the board may not discuss issues raised that are not listed on the agenda. Topics not on the agenda that are brought to the board's attention may be investigated by the administration and a report made to the board publicly or privately at a future meeting. Comments by visitors shall not exceed 3 minutes. Before we begin that, again, it's been my practice not to cut people off mid-sentence when their 3 minutes are up. And my intention is to continue that practice. But please, when your time is up, end the sentence, not the paragraph, so we can continue moving with our meeting. So first up is Armando Benavides.
Did you start the topic, or is this going to be the topic too? This is just other consultation.
Yeah, he's on the topic.
So this for items not on the agenda?
Yeah.
Or items on the
Not
agenda?
on the, yeah. So
Okay. All right. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. The next person then is Saeed Zargar. Did I pronounce that correctly? All right. Thank you. Please come on up. There should be a green light.
On now. It's on now. Okay.
Great.
Thank you. Good evening, esteemed members of the board. My name is Saeed, and I proudly identify as a Paradise parent. As we approach an important election season, I implore you to recognize the critical significance of amending the resolution to include the short-term seat for Area 3 on the ballot. With mere months remaining until this pivotal election, choosing an appointment over an election would significantly undermine our community's voice and the democratic process. Particularly noteworthy is the fact that the runner-ups for the seat, Area 3, have consistently faced rejection from the community in previous elections. The issue transcends personal interests. It's about upholding democracy, ensuring fair representation of our community, and above all, safeguarding the best interests of our students. I urge you to do the right thing by the community and our children. Instead, let us focus on doing what's right for the constituents who elected you to advocate for our children's well-being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now, okay, got it. All right. Next order of business is general business. And we'll begin with discussing possible action process to address the vacancy caused by the resignation. The following individuals would like to address the board on this particular item. Armando Benavides.
Good afternoon, Board of Trustees, Board President, Superintendent. So the statute basically allows you two options. One is to appoint somebody. The other one is to do a special election. There's no order of priority. It means that you have to determine one before you determine the other. So it's on your discretion. Now, one of the problems, I believe that the statute, education code that hopefully the attorney will address has already kind of precluded the election process, joining it with the general election that's going to take place November 2024. However, even if that was not true, I want to say that our trustee waited until the very end to announce to the public. I mean, just yesterday, I got a email saying there's going to be this board meeting. I mean, nobody in the community that I talked to, I called about 20 people. They don't even know about this hearing. They don't know that is taking place. They don't even know what's happening. And to expect for on Monday is when the candidate period opens up for people who want to run. They've known 2 years, 6 months, 3 months that there's an open seat that's up for election and that they could sign up for it. But guess what? District 3 did not have that option. You're basically going to be ramming an election to the voters of District 3. It takes time to see if you want to run. Some of you that are running for this election cycle know it's not an easy decision. We're giving them 3-4 weeks to decide, oh, I'm going to run. Do I have enough money? Do I talk to my family? Do I talk to my neighbors? Do I start putting together a campaign? That takes a lot of work, a lot of time and commitment. And for you to not give District 3 voters that opportunity is kind of nonsensical. Now, I'll tell you, it's not like you cannot give them that option. You could always opt for an election, but past elections, past times when there's been a vacancy, it's always been filled by the then trustees by first a appointment, because it's cheaper, easiest, and anybody in the community can just show up and submit an application and say, I'm here. They don't have to campaign. They don't have to put together a campaign committee. So that is why it's so important at this point in time. I would agree. Let's have that joiner. If Trustee Knudsen had given us at least a 3-month notice, 5 days notice is not sufficient.
Our next speaker is Anahita Yazdi.
Good evening. I just want to quickly address if there is a candidate who wants to run and is committed, there is ample time to do so for Area 3. With that, I want to start. I'm Anahita, Paradise Parents. I'm here today to urge you to include the short-term trustee Area 3 seat on the ballot instead of filling this vacancy by appointment. After speaking with various representatives at the ROV office, I strongly recommend you review the options and advocate for placing this short-term seat resolution on the ballot. Our democracy thrives on active citizen participation. When we choose to appoint rather than elect, would deprive the community of the rightful opportunity to choose their representative. This decision not only diminishes our voices, but also undermines the foundation of our democratic system. As elected officials yourselves, you were chosen, all chosen by voters to serve the best interest of our community and our children. The appointment process denies the people of Area 3 their right to have a say in who represents them. It is your duty to uphold the principles of fairness, transparency by ensuring this seat is filled through an election. This is the right thing to do for our community and for the best interest of our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sonia Bennett.
Hello, Sonia Bennett here. Good afternoon, trustees, president, superintendent. Thank you for having this emergency meeting. We are really happy that you were able to all attend and we have a quorum and a forum. I am disappointed that we don't have principals here. Teachers are not aware of this, the community. I think we only have a number of residents of District 3. And truthfully, I'm not even District 3. I'm District 5 for John Horner. So there isn't enough communication on what's happening. And if we make a decision today, I think that's going to be unfair for District 3, Paradise particularly. Armando has great points. He's a lawyer. He knows the legal speak. I don't. The community doesn't. We don't have the resources for legal. I wish I did. I wish I could have just gone into my pocketbook and just gotten legal Zoom or figured out what was needed to be done, but we don't have that ability as citizens. And I think Terry has made a very hard decision and we shouldn't fault her for giving it 5 days ago. She has her personal life that we admire and we are grateful for everything you've done for our community. District 3, even though I am technically District 5, you represent us, you represent the parents, you see what the students need. You are a librarian, you saw what the students needed every single day. You were fair. I saw you in meetings with parents and just being there, open, listening. Thank you so much for what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Keith Rochkine. Keith, did I mess up your last name?
Close. Rocket,
enough,
like
or-
rock and roll.
I apologize.
That's okay. Good evening. Wait till 3 minutes. All right. Good evening. Before I speak about Trustee Knutson's resignation from the school board, I want to thank her for her service and all she has done for the district, and I wish her all the best. So it is my understanding that there are options with how to resolve the issue of the vacated board seat. An interim trustee can be appointed by the board or the seat can be added to the ballot. So this presents you with a choice. You can issue an executive order for an appointment of your choosing, or you can pursue the democratic process of letting the people choose who we want to represent us. I urge you to remember that you are public servants. This means that you serve the public. And sometimes what the parents of this district want overlaps with your personal agendas, and sometimes it doesn't. But what makes this country great is it is a democracy, and that means that sometimes the people in power have to accept that the desires of the people differ from their own. Just because you have the ability to do something, i.e. appoint someone whose personal agendas coincide with your own, doesn't mean it is the right thing to do. Is an election more complicated? Undoubtedly. But to deny the people the opportunity to choose their elected officials undermines the fabric of democracy and erodes the trust that Morgan Hill has in the ability of its elected officials to operate in their best interest. We, the people, are urging a fair election and including the short-term seat on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Our next speaker is Megan Telfer.
Hello, Dr. Garcia and Board of Trustees.
My name is Megan Telfer, and I am a former MHUSD teacher and a current resident in Area 3. I have 2 students who attend MHUSD schools. I am here to request that Terry Knutson's seat on the Board of Trustees be added to the ballot. Since this is an election year, I believe this step is crucial in our pursuit of fair representation for our community. We should let the voters decide who should represent Area 3 on the Board of Trustees. It should be someone who lives in Area 3 and who puts our students' needs at the forefront. If the board chooses to appoint someone over a fair election, this undermines our voter rights and fails to serve the best interests of our Area 3 community. We must prioritize transparency, representation, and the democratic process. I implore you to add this seat to the ballot as soon as possible. Thank you.
We have Jim. All right. Our next speaker is Jim Levis.
Thank you. Good evening, President Escoto, trustees, Superintendent Garcia, staff and guests. I wanted to start also by thanking the board for this holding this special meeting in response to the unexpected effective August resignation of Trustee Eves Knutson. I am very sorry that Trustee Eves Knutson will be leaving the board, and I greatly appreciate her hard work, dedication to the students, the staff, and the city of Morgan Hill. So we will be sorry to see you leave, and hope that things go well as you depart. I know that one of the reasons the meeting was called this week was from information from the Registrar of Voters, which appears to have been kind of flexible and changed over the last few days. And I'm also aware of the latest letter from the Assistant Registrar of Voters, Virginia Bloom, regarding the options that the board has to address this pending vacant seat. To read from her letter, it says she understands that the deadline has passed to add the additional office to the November 5th general election. This means that MHUSD must either order a special election or make a provisional appointment to fill the vacancy. November is less than 130 days away, so therefore it is too late for a special election in November. So the board either needs to appoint or schedule it for the March 4th election. I strongly ask the board to choose the special election option. I believe that any additional cost is more than justified for the public. We live in a representative republic, and the foundation of the United States is in the choosing of our representatives through public elections whenever possible. While the board has the ability to appoint someone to fill the seat, I believe that there is enough concern in the community that any appointment might well be contested and ultimately still result in an election. I appreciate that there is a lot going on in the district, with the soon-to-be appointment of the Budget Advisory Committee, the need to prioritize district programs, and the need to address the structural budget deficit. I believe that the district would best be served by having the remaining 6 members of the board continue working on these issues through the election in November. I do not believe that the appointment of a potentially contentious individual during this time would be helpful. Trustee areas were established a few years ago to allow for more representation by the citizens of Morgan Hill. The Board of Trustees should be elected whenever possible. With almost 2 more years still on this trustee area cycle, it is possible, and you have the ability to make this election happen. I close by asking you to choose the March election to fill the soon-to-be vacated trustee area as the best and truly only sensible option. Cost should not be an issue. The best interest of the district and the community and our students should be the only thing that is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, and I believe our last speaker, is Pamela Meador.
Thank you, Terry, for all you've done for our district. It's really, really appreciated. We really feel that, I know this decision was very difficult for you, and it didn't go unnoticed how much you anguished over every one of your decisions, and we just really appreciate that. I wanted to say that from the bottom of my heart. I'm here tonight to urge the board to do what is necessary to give the voters the ability to choose Terry's replacement. Let the people decide. We are past the time, I believe, when it can be added to the November ballot, but March is not that far away. I understand the handicap you will be facing being 1 board member short. However, appointing a replacement that goes against the will of the people could trigger a special election, which is costly to an already financially challenged district. I'd also like to remind the board members that are running for re-election in November that voting to not allow the people in District 3 to choose their representative seems counterproductive. I realize we're talking 7 months from when Terry leaves the board and the March election, but the risk of appointing someone that is unpalatable to District 3 is huge, and the financial consequences of a special election we simply cannot afford. Please do not go forward with an appointment. Let us go forward with a resolution to tackle all the hard choices that are facing the district with a keen view towards launching solid candidates that can win on the stage of ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. I will now introduce Attorney Harold Fryman, who will make a presentation to our board. Mr. Fryman.
Thank you. My name throws everybody off. It's actually Freeman, even though it's spelled Fryman. So
I'm fairly consistent with messing up everybody's last name.
There you go. I appreciate your consistency. So yeah, thank you. I am Harold Freeman. I'm with the law firm of Lozano Smith, where I'm a partner. I've been with the firm for 30 years. I think most of you know my colleague and partner, Karen Resendiz, and she is on vacation. So you have the good fortune of having me here with you tonight in her stead. But actually, I do a tremendous amount of work in the area of board governance and elections. So this is right up my alley. And actually, there was a reference from a speaker in the public about your transition to by trustee area elections. And I was the attorney who handled that for the board at the time. So I'm very familiar with your district. I also have, for better or worse in those 30 years, dealt with board vacancy issues for dozens of school districts in California. And one of the lessons I've learned through that whole process is it's all about timing. There are some very complex rules I'm going to walk you through tonight because school districts are and school boards are creatures of statute. You have to follow the education code, and there's often confusion because there's other public agencies in California that get to follow other codes, parts of the elections code and whatnot. For you, we always start and end with the education code, and I think that may have led to some confusion in information that was out there from the Registrar of Voters office that has since been clarified. So I'm going to take you through this in detail because I want to make sure that we hit all the right statutes, and also point out that in your pecking order, we look first to statutes, and then we look to your board policies, and you actually have board bylaws specifically governing this situation. So I'm going to walk you through all of that. I know some of you are familiar with it, but for your sake and the public, I want to try to clear up any possibility of any confusion on these topics. So we can go to that next slide. There are applicable rules that apply. As I mentioned, different public agencies have different rules. You are governed by the education code, and the sections that are relevant to you are 5090 et sec, which is a nice fancy lawyerly way of saying the sections that follow 5090. And I'm going to take you through some of those this evening. Go to that next slide. The first thing to be aware of is that with a resignation, a 60-day clock starts. And when we look at a resignation, a leaving of the board, it's not the date that the person leaves, it's the date that they submit the resignation that runs that 60-day period. So if there's a deferred date for the resignation, as was the situation here, that 60 days starts, in this case, back on July 2nd. So you'll see here that the education code provides in section 5091, and if folks at home ever want to read the section that is the most applicable to everything we're talking about, that's the one, although I'll talk about a lot tonight. It gives you 60 days to do one of two things, and there's only two options given to you. And again, as creatures of statute, those are the lanes that you get to pick. And one is a provisional appointment, and we'll talk about that tonight, and the other is holding a special election. We'll talk about that tonight. And on the election, we'll also talk about when the special election can be joined to a general election that's already scheduled and when it's on its own separate special election. So with the timing of the resignation, actually, we can go back to that last one. With the timing of the resignation here, August 31st, 2004 is the deadline for the board to take an action. If the board does not take an action in that time period, the county superintendent becomes responsible for taking an action, and they too are a creature of statute. And so they only have one choice, which is to call a special election. So essentially inaction by the board is the equivalent of calling for a special election. The difference between those two is if the board is to call for a special election, you don't have to wait the 60 days. You can do it well ahead of that August 31st deadline if you'd like to. So now on to the next page. I have a lot of quotes from statutory language here. The statutes are much longer than this, I promise you, but I took out some relevant portions just to look at because I want to make sure that everybody understands where the slides I'm talking to you about are coming from, what the source is. So in Education Code Section 5091, Subdivision A, you'll see the critical language if a vacancy occurs or a resignation's been filed with the county superintendent of schools containing a deferred effective date. The school district or community college district governing board shall, within 60 days of the vacancy of the filing of the deferred resignation, either order an election or make a provisional appointment to fill a vacancy. And you can read the rest of that, but that's the source for this. You really just have two choices we go through this. And again, you'll see in that second part there where it comes from, where the county superintendent, if you don't act, steps in and act. And I've been involved with these before where it goes to that, either because the board's unable to make a decision in that time, or sometimes it's because resignations happen during the summer and there's not a lot of board meetings. So there's a lot of different reasons that boards sometimes don't get there. So if we can go to that next slide. I want to take you through the timeline, and I'm a visual learner. So first I'm going to do it with words and then I'm going to do it with a picture. So the timeline when we talk about this, just to take you through it, your resigning trustee's term would have ended in December of 2026, so a little over 2 years left on that term. Everything would have been different if the trustee in question had been up for election in 2024. So just to complicate things even more, as the legislature likes to do, there's different rules if the person resigns just before they would be up for election or 2 years before. And so we're going to go down that avenue of somebody who has or would have been up for election in 2026. The next thing you'll see is if we count the number of days back to the date the resignation was submitted, it's 126 days before the November 5th election. That's the magic number, 126. Because if you go to that next point, and again, I'll take you through this visually, per statute, if you are outside of within 130 days of the next regularly scheduled election, I'm even getting tongue-tied over this, the legislature does this to me, under the Education Code Section 5091, Subdivision B, it's too short of a period of time to make it on to the next general election ballot, which in this case would have been November 5th. So because the date's 126, it's shorter that 130-day window. The legislature has decided that's not enough time to get this added to the next general election, which would have been November 5th. I think where some confusion may have come originally from the Registrar of Voters office is this is a rule that is unique to school districts. It's just found in the Education Code. If it was the fire district or the city council or the board of supervisors, they don't have this rule. So this is the rule that applies to you, which means that you go to the next, what's called regularly scheduled election. That's a little confusing because it's a special election on a regularly scheduled date. And I'm going to walk you through that. It's interesting, the Registrar of Voters calculated that as March 4th. We calculated as March 11th. The good news is there's plenty of time between now and then to get that buttoned down, but we'll explain to you how it is that we got there. So we can go to the next slide. Like I mentioned, I'm a visual learner, so I wanted to sort of give you what that timeline looks like. In the first column, what you'll see, this is per statute that is specifically applicable when you have a trustee who resigns, not in the year that they otherwise would have been up for election. So your current situation where the trustee would have been up for election in 2026. And the legislature has given you a window. And if you calculate that window, it's between 6 months and then you bring it up to the present, the window is May 5th through June 28th. If the resignation had occurred between May 5th and June 28th, none of this discussion would happen. This would be on the next general election. All of the other decision points that we're talking about are not triggered. So that next column, you'll see June 28th was the cutoff to make it onto the next general election. The next date you'll see there is the July 2nd resignation date. The November 5th date is just to, again, note that is when the next general election is, but you skip over that to go to the next regularly scheduled date for a special meeting, which would be March 11th. So that just sort of takes you through and gives you the citations for where this is coming from. If you go to that next slide, again, I like to give you the specific language where this comes from. This is that subdivision B of section 5091 that I was referencing, and what now County Council has recognized and educated the Registrar of Voters Office on, and they have now caught up with the education code requirement. And again, what it says is when an election is ordered, it shall be held on the next established election date provided pursuant to Chapter 1, commencing with Section 1000 of Division 1 of the Elections Code, not less than 130 days after the order of election. And again, we're less than 130 days. We're at that now less than 126-day mark. So we go to that next slide. There's another code section that's important to just be aware of, which is 5093. So again, if folks at home want to see the ones that are most relevant we're talking about, it's 5091 and 5093. 5093 subdivision B has a series of exceptions and instances where the rules I just talked about with you don't apply. Unfortunately, none of those exceptions kick in here. And again, this is where the language, you'll see it bolded here, comes from. There is an exception if the resignation is, well, I'll start at the beginning. 5091, what we just talked about, does not apply to a vacancy on a governing board if the vacancy occurs or a resignation specifying a deferred effective date is filed with the county superintendent of schools during the period between 6 months and 130 days prior to a regularly scheduled governing board election, and this position is not scheduled to be filled at such election. So you meet the second part. This position was not to be scheduled to be filled at the next election, but you don't meet the first part, being between 6 months and 130 days. Again, that's May 5th through June 28th. So all of this is my long-winded way of saying 5093 does not apply in your situation, all of the exceptions that are listed there. And we're left with section 5091 and those two choices for the board. If we can go to the next slide, also just to talk about these established election dates. Again, what we're talking about is calling a special election. It just gets scheduled for what the statute refers to as an established election date. And if you look at these, the one at the bottom, E, first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of each year is November 5th. We've missed that. So you go back to the top of the list as you cycle through. The next available date would be the first Tuesday after the first Monday in March of even numbered years. This is for 2025, so it's an odd numbered year. So you go to B. You can tell what lawyers do in their spare time. We just work through these. So you go to B, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in March of each odd numbered year, which by my calculation is March 11th. And again, we'll get that worked out. I have a feeling that ROV may have stopped at A, and we'll get them with us to make sure they agree that it's B. In either event, it's early March of 2025. So this is the section, this is where this date comes from. We also look, if we can go to the next slide, I mentioned in addition to the education code, you're also governed by your adopted board policies. And not surprisingly, your board bylaws track these same sections. So they point out all of these same rules, and I won't belabor this one too much other just to point out that when a vacancy occurs, the board shall take the following action as appropriate. The first option you see there is when a vacancy occurs within 4 months of the end of a board member's term. Not applicable here because that would be 2026. The second is that same time period I've been talking to you about 6 months to 130 days, May 5th through June 28th. That doesn't apply because we're outside of that time period. So that automatically takes you down to number 3. And again, what it says just straightforwardly is that within 60 days of the vacancy or the filing of the member's deferred resignation, the board either is going to order an election or make a provisional appointment. So I know that's a lot of detail to get you to how it is that we reach what otherwise sounds like a simple conclusion. I think it also helps explain why the ROV, the Registrar of Voters, may not initially have gone through all of those steps and where the confusion came from. So what I want to do with the rest of my time, and I'm here with you all evening, I can answer all questions, and certainly we'll take questions when I'm done with this presentation. I want to take you through what the law says and what your bylaws say about these two options, which are within the board's discretion. And we'll start on the provisional appointment. There's a lot more to say on this one because you have more extensive bylaws and there's applicable laws to it that I want to walk you through. And really, this is laid out in your board bylaw 9223, which again, very nicely tracks statutory requirements. And I'll take you through each of the steps. So if the board was to elect to go the route of making a provisional appointment, and we'll talk about this language of provisional appointment and what that means, these are the first three steps, and we'll sort of walk you through the whole process. The first is to announce the vacancy, initiate the provisional appointment process. So you basically are making the decision to go that road. You'll see here a note too that within your bylaw, the concept is that a sub-quorum of the board, so fewer than 4 members, 3 or however many fewer than that you'd like, are selected to be an eligibility review committee. This committee does not do anything other than one thing, which is when applications are received, they're charged with checking to make sure that all of the criteria are met. One of the key criteria, and I know this because I lived through your process of moving to trustee area elections, the trustee has to live in trustee area 3. So that's basically a body of people that make sure the person meets the basic qualifications. They're not making recommendations, they're not making decisions, they're literally just checking to see if people are eligible who've applied. Secondly, advertising the vacancy. So you have specific rules laid out in your bylaws about putting this out in the newspaper, letting people know that there is a vacancy, throwing it open to the community so people are aware. If the board goes this route, we're looking at this 60-day window. Now it's a little less than 60 days, a week has passed, that you'd be doing that in. And then you see the eligibility criteria listed. Again, this is in your bylaw. It all tracks California law. The person has to be at least 18 years of age. They have to be a citizen of California. They have to be a resident of trustee area 3. They have to be a registered voter, and they have to not be disqualified from holding an office, civil office. And usually that's narrowly confined to some fairly serious felons that probably are not going to be applying for the board because they may be busy somewhere else. Trying to find a polite way to say that. So if we can go to the next slide, the next steps that you've got listed is that you interview eligible candidates at a public meeting. And that's an important one to pause on. This is a public meeting. It will be noticed if you go this route. Everybody gets interviewed in public. It doesn't happen in closed session. It doesn't happen with just the committee. The entire board in a public process gets to hear each of those applicants be interviewed by the board. And the appointment is also made in open session. That is not a secret ballot. That is not, again, closed session. It's all done very publicly. And one little thing just to note, it's an interesting rule that's laid out in the education code section. You see there 35178. It's also in your board bylaw 92222. We get asked this question a lot. For the board members who submitted their resignation, if it's a deferred resignation, as is the case here, what does that board member get to vote on and what don't they get to vote on? And nicely, the legislature answered that question. The board member gets to vote on everything. They are a full board member. They keep all of their rights until they leave office, with one exception. If you have an appointment process, they don't get to vote on who gets appointed. They can vote on the decision whether to have an appointment process. They can vote on who gets to be on your subcommittee. They can have input on all of the process all the way right up to that moment of the vote. And then they don't get to vote on that. And I've been asked before, why did the legislature do that? And I've never had to dig into it, but our understanding has always been, you don't just want the person who's leaving to pick their successor. You want it to be a public process and a decision made by the whole board. And that's really where that comes from. So if we can go to the next slide, there's still yet more points. The appointee, if they are appointed, they get sworn in, and literally they take the seat at the moment they're sworn in. They become a board member at that very moment. You gets reported to the county and the state, but they have rights as a board member from that moment. And then you publish notice that the person has been appointed. So again, there's this very public process. You put notice out in the local press within 10 days of the appointment to say that somebody has been provisionally appointed, and you identify who that person is. You also have to post it in 3 public places within the district. District office is usually one of them, public libraries, those types of locations. And there's specific ed code requirements, education code requirements that we didn't list here about what goes into that notice. There's a whole host of different things that you include. So if you go through that whole process, then we look at your bylaw. We go to bylaw 9223 just to note it. This talks about the committee. This is not something that is required by law. This was a decision the board made when it adopted this bylaw probably quite some time ago. And frankly, I think it's based on the California School Boards Association model pretty closely, that they came up with this as an idea. And you'll see it talked about there that a committee consisting of less than a quorum of the board ensures the applicants are eligible for board membership. And that committee basically would at a board meeting stand up and say, these are the applications received, these are the people that we found to be eligible. And then those people get to be interviewed. And again, you reiterate in your bylaw, this is all public with a public interview. The public gets to have input. They get to make comment on the candidates before a decision is made. And then you select the provisional appointee. So we can go to that next slide. And you have a lot more information in your bylaw, which we don't have to dig into in great detail tonight. It really tracks the statutory provisions that I talked about. And talks a little bit about some of what the notice posting requirements are. So you're putting a lot of information out there into the public. That's the idea. Tonight is really just a starting point to be thinking about these things. It's not the moment you're telling the public, this is what's happened and this is where we're headed. And one of the things that you'll see noted here, and this is where we get to talk about why it's called a provisional appointment, is if you look at number 4, it states a statement notifying. So when you notice people that you've made a provisional appointment, a statement notifying the voters that unless a petition calling for a special election pursuant to Education Code Section 5091 is filed in the office of the county superintendent within 30 days of the provisional appointment, it becomes an effective appointment. So for the first 30 days of service of that provisionally appointed board member, they have the title provisional, and on day 31, unless a petition has been filed, and I'll talk to you about what that looks like, they become a board member for all purposes. So if we can go to that next slide. Oh, actually, go back to that slide. I'm sorry, I went too fast. An important point is at the bottom. The person who's appointed holds office until the next regularly scheduled board election. So in this case, it would be a short term, we call it, because it's filling out the last 2 years and 4 months or so of the term of the departing board member. And that seat would be up for election in 2026. If it was the case that that seat was already up in 2026, it would have naturally been up in 2026. Here, it just plays out. That's how it works out as the statutes add up. So basically, it's a short term, 2 and almost a half years. So now if we go to that next slide, to talk to you about this petition process. So there is a process by which the public can have a recourse if they would like to challenge the board's decision, essentially. And the way that this reads, and again, this is all per section 5091, now we're into subdivision C, is that if within 30 days of the board's appointment, registered voters of the district, or where elections are by trustee areas, which is the case with you, of the trustee areas, submit a petition for special election, which the county superintendent determines to be legally sufficient, the provisional appointment is terminated and a special election shall be held in accordance with Education Code 5091 to fill the vacancy. And there is a requirement of what that petition looks like, what has to be included in it. I'll touch bases on it a little bit. An important thing to understand, though, is the legislature has made it clear when you look at what's required for that petition, it's all about, in your case, trustee area 3. So it's people who are registered voters in trustee area 3 that we're talking about. So we go to that next slide. You'll see here that the petition has to be deemed to bear a sufficient number of signatures. And that means registered voters equal to 1.5%, 1.5% of the number of registered voters at the time of the last regular election for governing board members. So what that means is that the petitioners would have to go find out what 1.5% is of the number of registered voters who voted in the last board election for trustee area 3, and then calculate from that what that 1.5% is. I don't have that number for you because we don't have the number of how many voted. But because it's just trustee area 3, you can imagine it's not going to be thousands of voters. It's going to be a smaller number than that. And again, they have to be registered voters. The earlier slide said that the county superintendent determines the sufficiency of that petition. And I've worked over the years for the Santa Clara County Office of Education as well, so I know that part of it. Really what they're doing is checking to make sure that everybody signed is a registered voter, and double checking that and making sure that there aren't people who don't exist or false signatures or somebody who appears twice. That's what the county superintendent gets to do with their lawyer. So if we can go to that next slide. The petition has to include a few elements. One of them is the estimate of cost for conducting the special election. This special election is going to cost the same. It's going to happen on March 11th, and it's going to cost the same whether you decide to call a special election or the county superintendent calls a special election or there's a petition that forces a special election. Our understanding, and this is anecdotal, I can't confirm it for you definitively, is that the last election that was a special election to fill a trustee area in the district cost about $500,000. So that was a few years ago. One probably would assume that it goes up from there. It always is a little tricky because you have to see what else is going on the ballot in March when they're calculating what the cost would be. But to some extent, your move to trustee area elections limited that because there's almost certainly not going to be another ballot measure that is unique only to voters in trustee area 3 of Morgan Hill Unified School District. So in all likelihood, you are carrying the brunt of whatever the cost of that particular special election is. And the cost has to do with things like printing the ballot and actually running the election. So that estimate has to be included in the petition. The petitioners are responsible for going out and finding out from the registrar of voters what that estimate would be. You have to identify in the petition the name and address of between 1 and 5 proponents, all of whom must be registered voters. So it has to be in the name of somebody that it's being submitted. And then there's a host of other very specific requirements, and I'm not going to go through them all, but the elections code sections that we look at are 100 and 104. So again, this quilt work, this patchwork of these different code sections that you have to work through. So if we can go to that next slide. Again, I'm a visual learner. So for those of you who are as well, I wanted to show you what this looks like. August 31st is the last day for a provisional appointment to be made. What we've noted here is that if that starts the 30-day clock for a petition, if you took action on August 31st, that takes you to September 30th. Now, obviously, if you act sooner, that 30-day clock starts sooner. So we just put that as the outside dates. If you acted on August 1st, it would be August 31st, I think. That is the 30 days later. But if we look at that outside date, it wouldn't be later than September 30th. And then the county superintendent of schools has another 30 days. So that could potentially take us to October 30th, 2024. And then it gets called for the next special election that is no less than 88 and no more than 125 days out from the county superintendent's verification of the petition. So if you look at that time period, lo and behold, you end up at March 11th once again. So all roads, if you go the election route, lead to March 11th. One thing just to note as the board is thinking about this, there is one significant difference between your calling an election, the county superintendent calling an election, or petitioners essentially forcing an election, which is it will potentially shorten or lengthen the amount of time that people have to campaign, to be aware of it, the distance between your decision and the election. So if it was the petition route, you can see it's potentially not until October 30th that we know that there's going to be a special election on March 11th. The board could decide next week that it wanted to have a special election, and then that would start a longer time period. So that may factor into decision-making for you all as well, as you think about the different timelines. We are getting towards the end, I promise you. I know this is complex stuff. I did want to note there's an additional resource out there for you, which is California School Boards Association puts out a manual on filling a board vacancy. It's very not carefully hidden. You can get it with a Google search. Just look up CSBA board vacancy and it takes you right to it. What you'll see in there is mostly just the statutes that I just talked to you about. But what they also have in there is if you decide you want to have a provisional appointment, they have, as you'll see as examples, letters that you can send out to applicants, inviting applications, sheets that candidates can fill out, potential interview questions. There's some really good resources in there if you go down that road. Beyond that, it's mostly the topics that we're talking about today. So now I've spent a lot of time on the first option, which is the provisional appointment. The second option is the special election. And in some ways, we've kind of already covered that. So this goes much faster. So if you go to the next slide, we've already seen the timing for it. If you call for the special election, it's ordered on the next established election date. That is not less than 130 days, takes us back again by our calculation to March 11th. The board would have to adopt a resolution. We don't have a board resolution for you tonight in front of you because we've had very little time to work through this. If the board noted tonight that it preferred to go in the direction of adopting such a board resolution, one would be prepared, and you really have between now and August 31st to do that. So there's some time available to do it, including if that's the board's direction tonight, to come back to your regular meetings in August and be able to adopt a resolution then. The election is at the district's cost. Now, I have to emphasize, the district is at the election's cost. If you call for the special election, if you take no action and the county superintendent calls for the special election, or if there's a provisional appointment and then a petition and a special election is called, it will always be 100% at the district's expense. So that's basically, you don't have reserves set aside from that. It's basically general fund money that you're talking about spending, no matter how that election plays out. So if we can go to the next slide, my favorite one. So I've talked to you a lot. Hopefully I've helped you stitch together all of these different code sections and help you understand how we got where we are. I do want to summarize again, it's our conclusion, you really only have three choices. One is that you have a provisional appointment. Two is that you call for the special election. And three is that you do nothing, in which case a special election will be called by the county superintendent. So in some ways, there's really only two choices. And the other thing to emphasize is if you're not ready to make a choice tonight, you have until August 31st. We wanted to bring this in front of you. I know that the staff was very interested, the superintendent was very interested in sort of getting the information out there so you can start thinking about this. If the board's ready to take action tonight, it's agendized in a way where you could make a decision. What those decisions would look like was either we would like to move in the direction of a provisional appointment, and then staff working with our office would work up that process and what that would look like and work with all of you. You could also decide tonight if you wanted who your 3 or fewer board members would be that would serve on your committee that would review eligibility for candidates. Or you could decide tonight, we would like to go ahead and call a special election, and then we'll decide when to come back to you with a resolution to make that decision. Or you could decide tonight that you need more time, because you have time built in until that August 31st date. We just wanted to give you enough time, as did staff, to be able to chew on this, if you will, both tonight and moving forward. So with that, I've said a lot of words. I'm going to throw it open to all of you if you have any questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation, for your comprehensive presentation. I'm sure there's lots of questions. And so colleagues, who would like to be first? Trustee Patterson.
May I call you Harold?
You may.
Please call me Mary.
Fair enough.
Where did you get the $500,000, $500,000 figure from? How reliable do you think that source is, since that's really pertinent to our discussion tonight?
So I'm actually going to turn that over to district staff because that's where I got it.
Thank you.
So I spoke with the ROV yesterday, and they had informed me that it can be anywhere from 500,000 to 2 million. It just depends on what's on that ballot at the time.
Thank you, staff. You can call me Mary Kelly.
Any other questions? If I may just interject on that last question. So the low was $500,000 up to 2 million. Okay. All right. Got it. Other questions, comments? Trustee Horner.
Yeah, I have some comments, not really questions for the attorney. I don't know if we're ready to move on to board dialogue. That's it. If there are other questions for the attorney, I'll wait. Other than that, I have some of our dialogue to begin.
I think what I'd like to do is keep it open so we could possibly do both.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So a few thoughts. I've been not quite 6 years on the board. This is the third time a resignation and potential appointment has come to us. In both of the other two times, we chose to make a provisional appointment, primarily for reasons of cost. I remember the very first time was literally my first board meeting when I learned that a previous trustee resigned after after the election. So many of us were quite new, and so this was all a very brand new thing at the time. And, so I was running up the learning curve on this particular topic. We had quite a number of applicants, and I remember, asking the then superintendent, how does this work? Because he'd had experience with this before. This is not new. This, the threat to democracy and all these kind of comments we've heard. I mean, this happens in local government on a fairly regular basis. It's happened Morgan Hill City Council. It's happened on this body. Life happens and people move on. And literally every time that I've either been a part of or observed, whoever the people have been there have decided, we're not paying for a special election. That's not a good use of taxpayer funds. An appointment in this very public process makes sense. This is literally the first time I've heard, any public objection to that. And I have to assume it's because of a presumption of what the outcome would be. And I have no presumption of what the outcome would be. And in fact, Mr. Batondo, when he was superintendent, said, one of the advantages of an appointment is that it in some ways opens the possibility up to a far broader range of people than might otherwise consider running, because they're not looking at $3,000 just to get their statement in a ballot and all of the social and financial rigors of a campaign. So that was counterintuitive to me at the time, but I'm always learning, and that was something shared then. So I'm supportive of doing the same here again for the same reasons. It's very important. I appreciate the attorney emphasizing how public that process is. This isn't, some smoke-filled room with cigars. I think for those who are already threatening, why, if you do that, we're gonna file the signatures. Well, that may happen. I think the truth is whether that would happen or not would depend on who was appointed, right? So when you talk about, the sacred nature of democracy, well, I think of Mitch McConnell and his machinations around when you could or couldn't appoint somebody to the Supreme Court based on what the presumed outcome was going to be. So that's really another issue here. But I think for us, continuing to do what has been done here and locally for a long time by many people makes sense. If enough folks want to gather signatures and get the accurate number from the ROV and direct us in a time of budgetary constraints to spend an awful lot of money on an election, well, then, that's what's provided for in the law. But those are my comments. If we get to that, to the point, I have a proposed motion to make, but I will hold off on that while there's other dialogue.
Thank you, Trustee Horner. Colleagues, any other comments, questions? Vice President Altman.
So, I'm on. What's going on? Okay.
There you go.
I said my mic was off. So I just want to, you can call me Nancy if I can call you Harold Friedman, right?
That's fair.
Friedman or
Freeman.
Freeman.
No
Okay.
D.
Sorry, I gave you a D.
Just go with Harold.
Harold, you can call me Nancy. Or you can call me Mary. So I'm just double, triple checking here since, the information that had come from the ROV kind of was morphing. And is there any possibility that we could still get someone on the 20th? It had sounded like that might be a possibility on the November ballot. Is that like a door absolutely totally shut, 100% not going to happen?
It is 100% shut. The education code prohibits it, and now county council has agreed with us on that.
Okay, checking on that. I'm just going to say I am concerned that, we're probably shooting for it. If it goes to the petition, first of all, I want to make sure it's my understanding as soon as it is affirmed, the candidate who has been the provisional appointee would then be removed from the position, and then it just stays blank until the election, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I was just kind of looking at the numbers from the last, but man, you hardly have anyone in your district. That it's probably going to be like less than 90 signatures necessary. So should we go towards the appointment? I just want to urge this body. We need to find someone who will be acceptable to the constituency.
Because we will find 90 signatures.
It's not appropriate, and this is the board's meeting that we're having in public, and so please allow us to have that meeting.
Okay, so we're going to need to keep that in mind if we move forward. It's hard to stomach the cost. And yet I think we will hear the will of the people if we don't represent well for should we select an appointee, a provisional appointee. So please, colleagues, bear that in mind.
Any other comments, questions? Trustee Gardner.
Thank you. Harold, will we get a copy of the slide deck that you shared with us?
Yeah, absolutely. This is public now, so the board's welcome to it, and I'm sure it will be made available.
Okay, because I was having trouble with my email or my internet earlier, but I did not see that come through. So
Yeah, we've been working on this up until, again, there hasn't been a lot of time, so it got finalized today.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification. With regards to the cost, so I understand it was a $500,000 to a $2 million quote, but with regards to this trustee area, it's a very small trustee area. So is anyone here qualified to give more input on the costs and how that could be, how we could get a better handle on what that might be? Because with such a small trustee area, I can't imagine we would be even we're going to be on the low end of that, I would imagine. Harold, do you have input or do you have input?
Well, if I can start, I mean, the Registrar of Voters is the source to go through, and the challenge is that you're printing a unique ballot. You're not printing a ballot that's on like the general election where it's just part of the whole. And so it may not be as many that have to be printed, but they still have to do all of the work. They have to work with county council. They've got to get the language together. They've got to put it together. So just in my experience, the spread isn't that big between different population areas. It's just a high upfront cost.
And that would be whether we did it in November, which that door is closed, or we do it in March. Is that correct?
If it was, yeah, November would have been cheaper because at that point you have a ballot that's being printed that's got the president and senators and Congress people, and all of these different entities share in those costs. Whereas if you have a special election for a board member in one trustee area, you're generally, that's it. You're carrying 100% of the cost.
So can you please explain how that may or may not be affected in March, if we wait till March with the primary?
So if it takes place in March, again, one of the challenges you have is that the ballot is unique because it's not even a district-wide ballot. It's just a trustee three area ballot. So it's unlikely there's going to be any other entity that would just be having an election just for that area. So when you're on the general election ballot, you have your entire district, you have fire district, you have all these other things going. So there's different people helping pay for printing, mailing, all of the different costs. This all falls entirely on the district.
With the March?
With March, yes.
Okay.
Other comments, questions?
It might help to remember, Trustee Gardner, that March 25 is not a primary. March 25 is just an election day where anything or nothing can happen. We would likely be the only thing that day, which means that that's what I think Harold is saying. We bear the brunt of the costs.
Any other questions, comments? If not, Harold, I've got a couple of questions. In the event that petitioners in District 3 would want to undo an appointment, would there be an obligation on their part to indicate the cost of such election?
Yes, they actually have to state that. They have to get that number from the Registrar of Voter, a concrete number, and that has to be stated on the petition.
Got it.
So as people are signing the petition, they are told up front, this is the resulting cost.
And so 90 people are going to decide that.
So we don't have the exact number, but
right.
I don't think that's an unfair estimate.
Got it. All right. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Going once, going twice. Trustee Patterson.
I guess I would just say that I've run a couple of these processes, 2018, 2019, 2019. We all had trustees resigning in those years. And the process was very transparent, and we had mostly excellent candidates come forward. It was a tremendously difficult choice with a lot of assets present. So I'm very confident that all of our districts hopefully have brilliant and passionate people who would be willing to put their name out. And so I appreciate Trustee Altman's plea, but I feel like many times we've had terrific people step up, like the people represented on this board today. So, and it has happened in the past with our provisional appointments and elections. People step up that are passionate and smart and want to do the work. I don't see this as different than an election where passionate and smart people are also stepping up. So in every district in our school district, so every trustee in our school district. So I have plenty of confidence, colleagues, that we would find good people regardless of the process that we use. And I also have confidence, having been through it 3 times, that the process we chose would be a good process, a reliable process, and a transparent process. I can remember having candidates come up one after the other for public interviews as we selected the last time around in 2019. So regardless of which way this board goes, I feel very confident in the population of our community for smart and passionate people to step forward, regardless of the process we determine.
I'd like to echo that as well. Harold, one other question regarding candidates for potential appointment. Am I to assume that whatever number that is, the board would interview all of them? There wouldn't be any prior pre-selection or anything else like that. The only area that we'd be focusing on is whether or not they're eligible to be a candidate in terms of being registered, age, and whatever other requirements are necessary. So we would interview everyone.
Yeah, the process you have laid out in your bylaws, again, the committee that you would potentially use is just checking that eligibility. All of the candidates who are eligible get passed on to the board. All of them get interviewed.
Got it. Sounds good. All right. Any other questions, comments?
Yes.
Trustee Gardner.
As a board, if we go the appointment process, then the entire board has final say on the appointee, correct? It's not from an ad hoc. The ad hoc is simply to establish that they're eligible.
That's correct.
Correct.
And again, that would be, at least 3 or maximum 3. I mean, one possibility, and we're certainly not there yet, but, we could have officers of the board, the three of us, myself, Trustee Altman, and our secretary, Trustee Patterson, or we can decide any other combination for that matter.
And if I can just add one thing, one slight clarification, it's not the whole board, it's 6 of the 7 members, because just to remind you that one member who resigned doesn't get to take part in the vote.
Everything but.
Correct.
Got it.
We still love you.
Trustee Altman.
Okay, left to my own devices and a Google search. The last special election for local election in Santa Clara County was at Milpitas Unified School District. It was $98,000. 98,000. So I feel like we're.
What year was that? I'm sorry.
Let's see. Here it's right here. So it's I think the 2020. Well, my point is this: we have incomplete information to make a decision tonight.
I agree.
And I really would much rather, there is a cost to democracy. I would like to see, and my base preference is an election. $500,000 kind of makes me gag, but I would like to know what we're looking at rather than just some vague, maybe it's this much. And if the petitioners would have to get that number, surely we can also get that number. Right now, unfortunately, we have one board meeting in November. I'm sorry. my brain stopped working. But yeah, so we have the one board meeting, but I really don't feel without, this is really a key component to which way we're going to go. And I'm not comfortable making a decision until we know actually how much it would cost, because there's a world of difference between what this is saying and I don't have full information, but I have a feeling that it's not as expensive as possibly the numbers that were provided to our staff. We can call her Kelly. So
you're recommending we?
Are you
take some
making a
time?
motion?
May I recognize Trustee Montes?
Thank you, President Escoto. Appreciate the information. Thank you for the presentation tonight and processing all that information and what it means for us, and appreciate the discussion here. I do agree that having the figure of the cost of the election is important information to have. I'm also thinking about having a seat vacant for over 7 months while that election would take place. So that's something that I'm thinking about, and considering the decisions that we will be making as a governance team in the fall with regards to our fiscal long-term reality. And so it's where I'm at processing the information, and I think that figure is important to have.
Right. Any other comments? Trustee Warner.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there's one significant consequence of delaying the decision, and that's delaying the application process. That clock already started since we're using first names, when Terry put her letter in on the 2nd, the 60-day clock started. If we're going to do an appointment, that has to happen in that window. And so I believe strongly that we should start that process. We've already lost a week. We're in the summertime. Many of our families and residents are out of town, right? So the process of getting the word out to any and all interested applicants that this is going on, I think time is of the essence. And yeah, we can, make a phone call or Google or get numbers. I mean, I think there's no reason to delay a decision on pursuing a provisional appointment. If people don't like the appointment and we later have a more firm number, well, then maybe that person's only appointed for 30 days or something. I think that would be, that is one potential outcome. But there's, from my point of view, no downside in going forward towards an appointment now, knowing that, there's two outcomes of that. There's an appointment. Well, there's 3 outcomes. There's a hung board and an appointment cannot be reached. That has happened historically in the past. And then that could happen. You could end up with a 3-3 that deadlocks. I don't expect that. I think that's irresponsible, but that has happened in the past. But I think we should move forward down that path, knowing various other things might happen along the way. If people want to find out whatever the actual cost would be. I know to put a candidate statement of 200 words in a big booklet that's already being printed is $3,000. 200 words in a big fat booklet that's already printed with tens of thousands of words. The supposed actual cost is $3,000. So I don't know, what was found about Milpitas, but I believe the $500,000 to $2 billion number, because I know how ridiculously expensive our county registrar of voters is to do anything. But, there would be time to do that later. So, if we're at a point of making motions, I'd like to make a motion to proceed with a provisional appointment and delegate the appropriate authority so we can get moving and get going against that 60-day clock and let people know there's an opportunity to apply.
Thank you, Trustee Horner. So we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I have details of that motion I've written down and sent to Ms. Schriefer. She can put up on the screen if people want to read it. This is a rather detailed.
Then do I have a second? I will second it. All right.
If you can make that big enough. Or how about if I read it aloud, if that's okay?
Please.
Just since it's hard to read the screen. So, the motion has multiple parts. Move forward with the provisional appointment process to fill the upcoming vacancy in Trust Area 3. Direct the superintendent or designee to advertise the Area 3 vacancy and appointment application in one or more local newspapers as required by law and our bylaws. Direct the superintendent or designee to publish an application for appointment with appropriate customization based on the model application as seen in the CSBA book that the attorney referenced, and setting an application deadline of August 20th. Because I worked with August 31st being the final date. Directed superintendent or designee to make the application available both digitally and on paper as soon as it's practicable, and to publicize the availability of that application on the district website. Is there any other means the district regularly uses to communicate with the community? Oops, I repeated one point twice. Sorry about that. I won't read it again. Establish a board ad hoc committee to review the applications for eligibility, and schedule a special board meeting on Tuesday, August 27th to interview all eligible applicants and potentially make an appointment.
Yes, Trustee Knudsen.
I would be willing to support this if we could do an addendum at the beginning that I think we need to respect many of the public that spoke tonight that want an election. So if we could find out from the Register of Voters within the next week what an accurate election would cost for our information, and if it is less than 500,000, come back to the board and we can meet again and make a decision. But if it's over 500,000 for sure, then I would be okay moving forward with that. I don't know how to word that. I don't know. If
Yeah, I
anybody
mean,
would agree.
I appreciate the intent and the flexibility. At the moment, as the motion maker, I'm not inclined to accept that particular modification, because one, I don't know that the Registrar of Voters can give us an accurate number this week. They're just opening candidate filing period, and I don't know how long that process takes. I'd be happy to, to have a side letter or a side motion, saying to, we'd like to, request from the Registrar of Voters, if possible, a more accurate number. And at a later time, this board could have a motion to reconsider and to take this back. But I don't have high confidence that we'll get a high accuracy number in 1 week. And so that's now this motion may fail and somebody can make a different motion, but that's my rationale for saying thank you, but I don't think that works as in this case as the motion maker.
Trustee Alden.
So here's what I'm thinking right now. If we go with a potential appointment, we collect applications. I think the process has the word I'm using isn't appropriate to use on a school campus, but it has language that with its California Ed Code 5091 CA2A, which is requiring the 1.5% in a petition to basically dispose of a provisional appointment. So that I think we do have, I'm kind of leaning towards we have that safety. We might find someone wonderful for an appointment. And I'm thinking that the people will still have the will and the ability to remedy if the residents of Trustee Area 3, of which only one of us is up here, so we're going to have to deal with someone where none of us are part of that trustee area. They have the ability to remedy any perceived wrongs that we make. And I do, getting it going sooner might be better. And then if it's not that expensive, I have a feeling no matter who we appoint, it'll be provisional and then it'll go to the March election anyways. I see. So that's kind of what I'm thinking now, is that maybe we can go through the exercise and maybe we'll get someone wonderful. If not, there is a process.
All right. If there are no other comments, questions? Trustee Patterson.
You made a comment about your experience across other school districts with special elections, and I believe that you stated something about your own experience with these costs. Can you repeat what your experience is with these costs?
It really depends across the districts. And I mean, some of the districts I did this work for was 10, 12, 15 years ago, and costs have skyrocketed since then. I know the example was given of Milpitas Unified, whom we also work with, and it makes a huge difference to know what that election was. Was it during a general election? What else was on that ballot? What was the sharing of cost? But you know, the 500,000 is high in my experience, but not surprisingly so, because 5 years ago, it wouldn't have been 500,000 here. It's just the costs have gone up that much. So I'm not entirely shocked by the estimate of 500,000. 2 million seems high to me, but nothing surprises me when it comes to the cost of elections.
Thank you.
So we have a motion for a provisional appointment, and it's been seconded. I now would like to put it to a vote, and I'm going to ask for a roll call vote.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Somewhere I thought that I heard provisional 30 days. Was that from you, or was that from you, or who was it from?
In the presentation, we talked about the appointment. You're provisional for the first 30 days, and if there's no petition, the provisional part is removed.
Okay.
So during if I may, during that first 30 days, if, you know, a sufficient number of residents of that trustee area sign off on a thing, then it's
Petition, then that appointment
that
stops.
person's removed and they've served their 30 days and it's over.
Okay, I still would really like to have an estimate of the cost.
Yeah, I think,
I mean, before voting, that's just me.
oh, before voting.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's-
well, I'm not sure how we're going to be able to get you that information, but you certainly can vote accordingly.
Correct.
All right, so I'm calling for a roll call vote. So Schrieffer,
Trustee Montez,
Trustee Altman, I'm just reflecting on my comments that presentation and what you shared certainly resonates with me. So I'm an aye.
Trustee Patterson,
Aye.
Trustee Knudsen,
This is an aye for
your mic is off.
Yes, it's an aye for appointment.
Yes, for provisional
Aye
appointment.
stands for appointment.
I'm going to say no.
Trustee Altman,
I'm saying aye, knowing there's an out.
Trustee Escoto,
Aye.
Trustee Horner,
Since I made the motion, aye.
Trustee Gardner.
No.
We have the total number.
I thought that Trustee Knudsen said no.
No.
She said no.
So that would
Two
be
no's.
3-2.
No. Terry and Pamela are no, everyone else was aye.
Is that correct? All right, so motion carries a 5-2 vote. Did I get that right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. Carol, thank you so much. Appreciate you helping us navigate this process. And once again, thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, you're not on vacation. But
I will be soon. Karen and I are going to take turns.
all right, good enough. All right, folks, that,
Mr. President,
yes,
so can we talk about next steps?
yes, please.
So, Mr. Horner, you had laid out some timelines
Mhm.
for advertising, taking applications, review, and interviews on a particular board date. Can you restate those, please?
Sure. The deadline for application I proposed is the 20th of August. And then the special meeting to interview the applicants a week later on the 27th. Those are 2 Tuesdays. And I chose the 27th to have a few days before the 31st for any contingencies. And then I guess we also should talk about the eligibility review committee as the next piece of business. We should establish that.
The thing about the timeline is in order to attract these passionate and brilliant people that I know are out there and interested, time is of the essence.
Yes.
And so I would like to spend a few minutes discussing our next steps so that we can get going and attract the largest, cast the widest net for applicants. And I will tell you from experience, the more time ticks away, the harder it is to have a good and transparent process and make a good decision. Therefore, these are dates in August where there are currently no board meetings scheduled, if I'm not mistaken. We have one scheduled on the 13th. So we're adding 2 more board meetings in August, which everybody might want to put their calendars now.
If I may, the 20th is just a deadline to apply.
Gotcha.
It's not a meeting.
Thank you.
There's an
The
additional
20
meeting on the 27th.
7th
Yeah.
is an additional meeting. And Superintendent, what kind of staff do we have right now that could start drafting these types of announcements? And what are we looking at in terms of a timeline and advertising?
So our goal is to follow this motion. I will work immediately with Lene and begin casting a very wide net in terms of advertisement for this vacancy. And I believe that there are a couple of editors of our local newspaper, and so we'll be in touch with them tomorrow. In addition to placing it on our website, printing copies of the application. I sort of see it as a similar process as the Budget Advisory Committee, in peppering our entire community, more specifically Trustee Area 3, and letting everyone know that we're looking for.
And then interview questions. So it's very important that we follow a very strict process that's consistent across all candidates. A draft of interview questions would need to be created. Do you have staff available that could?
We
draft
do.
those?
We also have, thank you to Kelly, we have a very detailed file with previous applications and all of the various questions that the board asked.
And rating systems, et cetera, that we've employed in the past.
We have all of that. We're hoping to use the same process that we've used in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Knudsen.
Can you be sure to notify the principals and the home and school clubs at the local schools in my area, the Walsh and the Paradise, and be sure that the school will have started by then, right?
Yes.
So we can focus on those schools as well.
Yes, absolutely.
We
Anything
wouldn't
else?
wait for school to start.
No,
To do
right,
this.
let them later.
Trustee Montes.
Speaking of next steps, would it be helpful? I'm wondering if we should already determine who would be on the committee that our attorney mentioned we should have in place.
As I suggested, and again, it was just a suggestion that the officers of the board be the 3 individuals that verify eligibility.
I'd like to recommend Trustee Gardner be on the committee instead of myself. Would you be interested and willing to serve?
Thank you. And you're good. All right. So that will be our eligibility team, Trustee Gardner and Trustee Altman and myself. All right. Anything else?
I would just like to thank Ms. Schrieffer for making the calls to the ROV and doing everything to put this meeting in order so quickly. Thank you, Ms. Schrieffer. Thank you for following all the legal notification timelines, for putting an emergency meeting in order. And thank you for contacting the ROV with that information I requested at the beginning about cost. I think I would like to make sure that we do get the best estimate possible. As we've learned today, the ROV information might not always be entirely reliable. So from our previous experience around this whole deadline situation, who can go after that number that with any degree of aggression and reality? With something in writing from a highly placed person at the ROV. Thank you, Ms. Schrieffer.
I'm curious, would it be possible to share that number once it's obtained?
Absolutely. I would encourage
Just an email to the board and the public. I mean, I think that's fair enough.
That's a good suggestion. All right. Any other comments, questions? All right. Hearing none.
Wait,
Yes.
before we conclude, I'd like to ask
Trustee Montes.
our attorney here, who's present, if there are any other immediate action steps that we haven't discussed that you think would be pertinent for us to discuss before adjourning our meeting. Thank you.
Once again, thank you. Thank you so much.
we do it the 1st or the 13th, it'll be well in time before we actually,
That's accurate.
okay. So then in that case, given what I know will be on the retreat agenda,
Probably not.
I would say the 13th.
I agree.
Okay. Trustee Patterson, did you have a comment?
What is it that that you just said we needed time on the 13th to do
To discuss,
Interview questions.
Interview
and
questions.
process?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. The other thing I think we should talk about is if we have a lot of applicants, are we going to limit time?
Okay.
Which we do in the corporate sector as well.
Right.
Question, yeah, question. So this would all have to be discussed in open session, I believe.
Yes.
So it seems that if we're going to discuss the questions, I'm wondering if that would be better for the ad hoc committee just to agree upon some questions and have some faith from our colleagues, unless otherwise it's going to be out, there's not going, it's.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. We all in agreement?
I'm in
Yes.
agreement. That's
Yeah. Great.
Faith granted.
All right. We have consensus. All right.
Hi.
Anything else? Trustee Gardner.
Knowing what we have coming up, if it's possible, I would like to request that our agenda schedules, who's ever doing the agenda prep in August, try and keep it in mind that, we don't want 6-hour meetings if we don't have to. So if we could try and limit the other big items on the agenda while we're going through this, I think it would be really helpful.
Always a challenge, but yes. All right. Anything else? Hearing none, I'm going to adjourn this meeting.